Sudan's leading general has declared a state of emergency and dissolved the government hours after his forces arrested the acting prime minister and disrupted the internet in an apparent coup. In a televised address, General Abdel Fattah Burhan announced that he is dissolving the country's ruling sovereign council, as well as the government led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. He says he was doing so in efforts amidst preserving the path of the magnificent December revolution until its final goals are achieved.
And we are taking these steps that are preserving the path of the magnificent December revolution until its final goals are achieved in arriving at a completely civilian state through free and transparent elections. So in order to correct the path of the revolution, the following has been decided. Firstly, the declaration of a state of emergency in all areas of the country. And number 4, the dissolution of Transitional Sovereign Council and dismissal of its members. Number 5, the dissolution of the cabinet. Number 6, conclusion of the tenures of the provincial governors.
Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who is reportedly under house arrest, is asking Sudanese people to continue holding peaceful protests and defend the revolution, according to a post on Sudan's Information Ministry Facebook page. He says joint military forces that earlier detained him in his house have been pressuring him to announce a statement supporting the coup. After refusing to endorse the coup, the army has now moved the prime minister to an unknown location. It adds in another post, earlier the ministry said civilian members of Sudan's transitional ruling body and a number of ministers have been detained and taken to an unknown location. Thousands of people have flooded the streets in the Sudanese capital Khartoum and its twin city of Omdurman to protest the apparent military takeover. The takeover came after weeks of rising tension between Sudanese civilian and military leaders. A failed coup attempt in September fractured the country along old lines, pitting more conservative Islamists who want a military government against those who toppled Omar al-Bashir in protests.
There's a huge change. Sudan has entered a new phase. The consequences of this phase could be miscalculated. Those adventurers who are behind it have plenty of plans and scenarios to continue it, even if it leads to what is unfortunate.
Nigeria has condemned the military coup in Sudan. The Nigerian government called for the immediate restoration of civil rule and release of the ousted prime minister and all political prisoners detained by the soldiers. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is asking for implementation of the agreed roadmap to return the country to constitutional democracy. Another coup again in Africa. Soon we have gone back to the 1990s.
Yeah, and 80s.
And the 80s.
Where it was once fashionable. But I suppose we're not quite there because Nigeria has joined the global condemnation. There's AU, EU, UN, US, they've halted, their aid to Sudan. But I recall being on this show in 2019 and everybody was congratulating Sudan on this transitional council with 11 members, 5 of which are civilian, 5 military, 6 civilian. And I remember not being that impressed by that, to be honest with you. I'm going to borrow Pastor Tunde Bakare's phrase. I felt as if the military then had given the crown to the civilians, but were holding on to the scepter. I feared that this would happen. I'm always quite worried about interim governments for obvious reasons. And, my worst fears have come true. It made me very uneasy. You have all these military figures on this council, headed by this general, and just weeks for him to hand over to a civilian to continue till 2023 when they were supposed to hold their elections. This is what they do. Like you said, there was a coup attempt recently, but that apparently was from people who were partial or in support of the deposed Omar al-Bashir. But I guess the military just saw their moment and they took it and they run with it. And it's so disgusting that the speech that General Burhan gave was talking about safeguarding, what did he say? Safeguarding the dreams of the youth and the hopes of the nation. That's why you've killed 10 people already. And counting, I hate to say, and injured 140 because you're trying to safeguard dreams and hopes. This is really discouraging. The people of Sudan have been through so much. This is the last thing that they need. And do we really believe at this point that they will hand over to any kind of civilian rule, which is what they're saying, that they're going to hold on to power. It's not safe in the civilian hands. They're going to take it away from the Prime Minister, Hamdok, who we don't know his current whereabouts, along with members of his cabinet and his wife. We're going to just hold on to it for safekeeping and we'll hand over. A likely story. It's so discouraging.
Has the Guinean guy handed over yet?
They don't, do they?
Dr. Bati?
Well, Sudan has not known peace since 1956. Since 1956, the story of Sudan has been one of coup, counter-coup, strife, poor leadership, leading to the division of that country, with South Sudan becoming another country out of the original structure in 2011. Now, but the main country itself suffered bad leadership, particularly under the watch of Omar al-Bashir, who went after the opposition, civil society, jailed a lot of people, drove a lot of people out of the country. But 2 years ago, he met his own Waterloo. He had before then been declared, a persona non grata within the international community, such that he could not really move around freely around the world. You remember the time when he was in South Africa, and he had to be given a safe passage to escape. Now, why am I going back to Omar al-Bashir, the disgraced leader, of Sudan? Because all of this that is happening is connected to that immediate past. And it's about the dangers of the strongman politics in Africa. If you look at many of the countries that have imploded, what you find is, you have this dictator who stays there, who spends a very long time. He destroys the country in the process. And that famous phrase kicks into effect, après moi le déluge. In 2019, the people of Sudan received a lot of support from the international community because everyone felt that Omar Bashir had overstayed his welcome. Now, 2 years down the line, look at what is happening in Sudan. Look at what happened also in the case of Côte d'Ivoire after Houphouët-Boigny. And that is why, in Africa, one major priority as we seek democratic consolidation should be insisting on good governance, good leadership, because in one country after the other, we keep seeing the effect of what bad leadership could have on a long-term basis, whether it's in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or it is in, Côte d'Ivoire, or it is, Sudan that we're faced with now. Now, quickly, what has now happened there shows that the arrangement that was worked out in 2019 between the civilians under the umbrella of Freedom for Change, Coalition for Freedom and Change, and the military has not really worked. And it also says something about the military in Africa. Before we go to this moment, a pro-military group was demonstrating in front of the military headquarters and asking that the coalition, the partnership with civilian leaders should be collapsed. And then you had, on the other hand, a pro-democracy group. So at the moment, Sudan is divided. And the big fear is that this could degenerate into a civil war. And if a civil war were to happen in that country, the people who will bear the brunt are the people of Sudan, who, even after Omar Bashir, have not enjoyed good governance. The international community, the US, the EU, the AU, African Union, and the Arab League have expressed concern. Now, it's not enough to express concern. What we expect is a very strong condemnation of what is happening in Sudan at this moment, and to speak up against the possibility of a coup. And, if you look at Sudan, the economy is down, human rights violations are still continuing. And that really is an aspect of the tragedy, at the heart of the African story. So the international community, we need to be more resolute in speaking to the strongman, the military leader in Sudan, General Hunan, and ensuring that Hamdok, the Prime Minister, and his wife and other cabinet members are freed and that nothing happens to them. And this is an attempt, it seems to me, by the military in Sudan to derail the transition that has been scheduled for July 2023. That was the original agreement.
Thank you so much, Dr. Batiantunu, for your input.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now for Global Business Update is Michael Wilson from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. Asia stocks actually doing reasonably well overnight. South Korea's Kospi up about half. Japanese stocks, though, up 1.5%, nearly almost 2%. And mainland China stocks nudged higher. The Shanghai Composite up about 0.1%. But I'm going to add now a fourth China property developer. This one's called Modern Land. And it defaulted on an overseas debt obligation yesterday. Now, we do know that Evergrande, because they're in the same sector, has another gross payment due this week on the 29th, and it will be nerves will be very taut, really, until that actually is paid or not, as the case may be. So the property market, the property sector, rather, real estate sector in China, still extremely interesting and very volatile. China needs more coal to avert a coal crisis. We know that it's got an energy crisis. We've heard, but it's not likely to come from Australia. We're hearing that a few tons, I think it was about 400 of tons of coal were released from the docks last week, signalling perhaps that Chinese restrictions are falling on Australian imports, and around 20 provinces, as you know, have already reported shortages of coal. So we'll see again an ongoing story to watch, really, as far as China's energy crisis is concerned. And China's Vice Premier, Liu He, spoke with the US Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, yesterday. The talk there was really about macroeconomic relations. No details of what they talked about, but as I always say, you know, if they're talking, it's better than warring, basically. Georgia, all better than war, and so on, as the old phrase says. Tesla has become a $1 trillion market capitalization results of its as a result of its sales. But that's interesting, but also China's sales are up to half what they're actually selling in the US, up to 22.6%. So it's actually getting quite high, and that was just in the third quarter. New York, the trading company, now this really happened because Hertz has now agreed to take on 100,000 Tesla cars by the end of the year. So that's good for them. UBS beat analyst expectations. Profit there, 2.3 billion for the most recent quarter. Reported a net profit 2.3 billion. It comes after it posted that 63% increase in the previous quarter. Shares are up about 24% in that bank as well. US stock futures, just a bit of a recap, sort of steady, really. Big lot of technology earnings coming today. Facebook 3% higher in after hours trading after it topped analyst earnings. And I'm going to come on to the whistleblower business in a moment. Facebook said it expects fourth quarter revenue of 31.5 billion. And it shrugged off basically the most recent whistleblower giving her evidence in London yesterday. There's a huge dump of actual documents still coming out of Facebook. Mark Zuckerman has been saying that he's unaffected by it, and it's just people taking a pop at Facebook. I think it's slightly more than that. There's a fierce competition now as far as social media are concerned for a younger audience, which is actually retreating from Facebook because they find it's old-fashioned. And TikTok and Snapchat are fellow tech heavyweights, and they're putting an enormous amount of pressure on Facebook as far as competition is concerned. So we're going to hear from Apple, Alphabet, and Twitter, who all announce round about lunchtime today. Dow Jones in record territory once again. Nothing particularly new about that. Here's an interesting one now from Amazon in the UK. It struck a deal which is worth between £500 and £1 billion with UK spy industries to host top secret material. This is a very interesting story. This is about Amazon Cloud Computing arm AWS. Now, again, all eggs in one basket comes to mind particularly. There'd be sovereignty issues about this. But anyway, Amazon now hosting, it will be in this country, but will be hosting top secret material on its cloud arm. UK budget, that's tomorrow. More fractious backdrops, basically. Great shortage of meat now in this country and so on. And adding to the fact that customers are down 20% in, generally speaking, across service industries, increase in corporation tax, VAT cuts, and all those things that are supposed to help the pandemic. But however, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will claim that the economy is back on track. Oil prices are rising. I'm sure you're monitoring what's happening at your pumps. We certainly are in this country. I'm not talking about queues now, because that's all seems to have disappeared. It's just the minor problem of huge increases in petrol pump prices. And Brent crude could hit $90 by the end of the year. That's what Goldman Sachs have been saying. Again, I would caution against that. Only it might reach that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's all good news for oil producing companies. Because, as I keep saying, it is a commodity. Those prices start to rise, then people will be less inclined to pay those kind of prices. But we're talking about $86 a barrel, so it's creeping there. And finally, gold, its price action remains constructive. That's what the technical people are actually saying. It's getting towards it got towards 1807, so it's hit the 1800 barrier overnight. Rally is more impressive by the fact that the US dollar has actually also increased in strength, because normally when the dollar's weak, the gold price rises simply because it's paid for in dollars. But that hasn't happened, so it's getting a lot of intrinsic value right now. It must be something to do with the considerable risk the world is now facing. That's your global view.
All right, Michael, some quick insights as regards the UK economy. I don't know what is happening. Logistical nightmares, supply chain challenges everywhere. Winter is coming. You don't like to hear the word winter of discontent, but it's looking like it. And it looks as though there are no solutions. You said, yeah, the petrol queues are over. But you have not solved the problem, or Britain has not solved the problem of the value chain crisis, even with a visa policy to bring in more drivers and balance out the economy. That's one. Two, there's another stark report coming out of China that says, despite the fact that it can't pay its creditors, Evergrande is still building more properties. So they have gone back to meet some of the people they've contracted their projects to. They've negotiated with them, and they've resumed, building some of the properties that there are no buyers for. What is happening out of China?
Well, I was reporting, I don't know what's happening in China, no more than anybody else does, actually. We make informed guesses and the little figures that actually come out of it. We did see those date-stamped pictures, though, you're quite right, of work continuing, or rather resuming, as far as Evergrande's concerned. And I was reporting to you this morning, there's another, a fourth large Chinese property or real estate company. It has defaulted on its debt. So I think what's going on there is quite serious. As I say, the question really is anybody going to come in? Is the government going to come in to support Evergrande? Because it will lose an enormous amount of face if it goes broke. I mean, you yourself quoted the figure about, that you could actually fit the populations of some small European countries into the vacant properties that Evergrande is now sitting on. I think that that something will happen there, but it will have. It's an ongoing story. We just don't know. That's the problem, is it? We don't know what's going on. We'll never learn, because the Chinese authorities won't admit to anything going wrong. But it clearly is, from what's being said now, and it's got another debt coming up. And I think that things are going to be pretty fractious about Chinese property up until then. However, the other news is, of course, that Tesla is selling a huge amount of electric cars in China. China's manufacturing themselves. So there is a bit of consumer demand actually happening in the country. So I suppose you're getting this normal kind of mixed picture. But I think the role of the state, as it always is in China, is going to be crucial for this. As far as supply chain problems are concerned, yes, I'm sure that a lot of people will be worrying about this in this country. But I think these supply chains, it's a universal problem, isn't it? Most countries are actually finding this. What's actually happened is that the demand from the post-pandemic period, whilst it's not perfect, and it's certainly not up to pre-pandemic levels, has caught everybody by surprise. And hence, there are going to be there's going to be supply chains. As far as fuel prices are concerned, yes, oil prices heading up there, and retailers who make very little money. I know it's like in your country. In the UK, they make very little money on the petrol forecourt. It's mostly about opening shops. Are being asked to take less profit. Well, I believe that when I see it, quite honestly. No, I think we're headed for more pain at the pump, certainly.
Well, Tesla. Let me start with Tesla. Now, I know in the past you were a bit skeptical about the future of the electric vehicle, and I recall you talked about cost. But now what has happened between Tesla and Hertz and that deal to supply about 100,000 electric vehicles? You just said, well, it shows that there's growing demand. Does it also tell us that the future is in that direction? Considering the fact that Tesla, at over $1 trillion now, and its share price growing by about 12.6%, does it mean, and in fact, in terms of real value, that's equal to about 9 basic regular vehicle manufacturing companies, including Volkswagen and Toyota. So what does this tell us about the future of electronic vehicles? Now, as regards our expectations for tomorrow, there have been a lot of media leaks from the Treasury in the UK. But some people are very skeptical. They're saying that, look, whatever is being proposed is not likely to make any significant impact on the structural economic problems facing the United Kingdom. And that the Chancellor holding up the red box is just engaging in a charade. And that very soon that much will be clear. Take, for example, the plan to increase minimum wage, and then the plan also to increase wages for public sector workers. The business community is saying, look, this will put pressure on small firms and businesses, and that it will have a corresponding impact on the rate of inflation in the United Kingdom. And you recall that before now, we said that the chief economist of the Bank of England and Andrew Bailey himself, the governor, had said inflation will go up. Is this an indication or a suspicion on the part of businesses that the inflation can even go higher? But what do you think? Do you think that the positive note being struck by the Chancellor, makes a lot of sense? Or, as we said yesterday, the budget, the details that we'll get tomorrow will be really very tricky and may not offer much?
Yeah, as far as the UK budget is concerned, it will be very tricky indeed. I think he will be. He's under pressure to say that everything is getting back to normal. It clearly isn't, and I think that is shared by most. We have no idea where the economy is going. Public sector workers getting more money. To be honest, that's a political move. The point about public sector workers is of course they should get more money. But who doesn't want more money? But the thing is, with public sector workers, and particularly the NHS, it's very, very difficult to put a slide rule over their productivity as a result of this increased money. And the old formula used to be, if you work in the private sector, i.e. for companies that are not owned by the taxpayer, then you get paid higher wages. Well, that kind of is not the case anymore. And actually, most public sector workers have inflation-linked pensions for when they retire, which certainly does not happen with people who may be earning slightly more in the private sector, but their retirement has to be funded by themselves. That's the real key to what's actually happening, and nothing of that has changed at all. Will there be anything about the great hump of long-term unemployed? I suspect no. We'll be stuck with that. Will it be about growth? Yes, I would hope so. Is it going to be tricky? You bet it is. And it's like everywhere else. In a democracy, you have to face up to the fact that when times get tough, the rich have to pay for it. And that takes us directly onto electric cars. I have no problem with looking towards the future and saying, of course, electric cars are going to be the future, but it's a question of when. And I think we'll get it's not so much about Hertz buying. That's good for the share price. That shifts a load of cars. It's when Mr. and Mrs. Average decide that they can actually afford to buy an electric car. And at the moment, they are very, very expensive indeed because there are so few of them. And that we don't have the infrastructure within. I know it's like with you, in our country, there is not the infrastructure to support journeys more than about 250 miles. Now, I know we're a small country, but you can rack up 250 miles pretty quickly just on a weekly shopping visit. So, you need this revolution will happen, but it will cost a lot. But the key to it will be when it becomes affordable, like most things are. That is the history of economics. When things become affordable, people adopt them.
Well, about Amazon, I'm really impressed by Amazon Web Services. This is quite a coup for them to get this deal to host classified material. I mean, Amazon Web Services is massively profitable already. There's like 1 million, I'm sure, people and organizations who use that service. But they're doing good. talking about the spy deal. It's about, hostile disinformation, snaring child abusers. I think it's a boon. I'm sorry. I think it's great. It's very exciting. I have to now talk about Facebook. Facebook is less exciting. You did say about Mark Zuckerberg's sort of defiant stance to this whole whistleblowing situation that's going on. Yeah. Yes, he's taken a hit. His company has taken a hit in its moral standings. But from what you just said, $31.5 billion as an estimate revenue is clearly he's not taking a hit in market value. The bottom line is not being affected. Do you think that will hold out much longer? Do you think eventually they're going to have to really reckon with what the whistleblower has exposed, talking about how children approach Facebook like addicts? It's really damning, and how children are, have to view images of anorexia and what have you, and it encourages them down the road to eating disorders, and they have osteoporosis in their middle age. It's awful.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with social, I mean, never mind Amazon, that's the deal, and it's down on the cloud, and I have my doubts about it, but let's see what happens about that. Facebook is much more interesting. What Facebook is losing out on now, because kids are finding it old-fashioned. Here are the statistics. So 18-year-olds down 4% as far as subscribers are concerned, 29-year-olds down to 45%. So what's clearly happening is, as people are getting older, they're adopting Facebook. The kids aren't. The kids are on Instagram. The kids are on Snapchat. The kids are actually, and unfortunately, yes, you're right, the addiction thing is appalling. The other comment that I was reading this morning about it is that people tolerate stuff online that they would not tolerate in real life. Now, what's all that about? How does that actually work? Do you think, yes, I definitely think that Facebook should be brought to task and should face societal values in the same way that everybody else does, like you and I do, like most media does. And they seem to have escaped this. I think that Facebook is not only, I think it's facing commercial trouble because it's not getting a young audience anymore. It's looking slightly old-fashioned. And the other side of it is that this addiction is outrageous. I mean, if you go to restaurants nowadays and you eat out, do you not see the kids in front of their iPads not talking to their parents? My kids wouldn't be allowed to do that. I'm sure yours wouldn't either. That's what's happening, and it's about education. It's about being able to say, I will not look at that because I don't believe it, because it's actually what people are seeing on Facebook and the other social media appears to be the truth. It is not. But you've got to be educated to get to that level.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Wilson.